This is the Montana Outdoor Podcast, brought to you in part by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to rmtte.com for more information. And by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. Now, get ready for more fascinating topics and the most interesting people you will ever find in Montana's great outdoors. We offer new podcasts most every Saturday. You can get a link to these podcasts by going to our website, montanooutdoor.com, or by going to our Facebook page, or just send an email to downrigger@montanooutdoor.com and say send a link to my email. It's that simple. Now let's head out with your host, Downrigger Dale, and see what's going on in Montana's great outdoors.
Thank you very much, Manny. Welcome into the Montana Outdoor Podcast studios, everyone. So glad you chose to join us to explore more of Montana's great outdoors. I want to give a special welcome to our men and women of the United States Armed Forces that are deployed all across the world listening to this podcast. Great to have you join us here, and we hope we bring you a little bit of home to wherever you're at, protecting us all around the world. And thank you to all of our wonderful veterans for your service to our great country. To everyone listening here, I have a favor for you. If you would please just share this podcast to your social media and with your family and friends. It helps us out a lot. Today I have a special podcast for you that I hope will give you some great ideas to make your fishing adventures go even better. Today we're going to talk to three guys I admire a lot for their ability to be able to have all kinds of tackle and everything else you can think of right at their fingertips on their boat, but still be completely out of the way so you're not tripping all over stuff while you're trying to land that prize fish on the end of your line. So today you will hear from one of the top fishing guides in Montana, Don Wilkins, who has a guide that has to be ready for anything at a moment's notice, and we'll chat with likely one of the best trollers of big species like lake trout and king salmon on Fort Peck, and he also fishes the Great Lakes quite often as well. We call him Bill the Salmon Slayer Zaradka. But first, we'll start with my best friend and fishing buddy, and I'm talking about the captain of the Montana Outdoor Radio Show. And what I wanted to do this podcast because I think, one, it's going to give some people some pretty good ideas of how to organize their tackle, organize their boat better so that, especially when you're fishing on a lake like Fort Peck or other areas where you're dealing with multiple species and all that, to be able to switch and go and do all that and not have stuff going all over the boat. So, Captain, thanks for joining me on this, and hopefully you can share some of your secrets and help get other people organized.
Well, I don't think I have any. I think you're talking about the wrong boat as far as organization goes. I will tell you something about Downrigger, though. When we're salmon fishing, there's some
little downtime. Yeah,
there's some downtime, and Rigger will look at one of these boxes that I have of either big flashers or small flashers, and he'll start looking at them, and then he'll take everything out, and then he'll start organizing himself what I've got in the boat. And then he'll go to the flies, and then he'll go to the Brad's cut bait, and he starts organizing everything. So all of a sudden I get a text from somebody that says, hey, we just caught a salmon 75 feet deep. It was on a, let's say, Mountain Dew Brad's cut bait, and we had a flasher, and they kind of sent a picture of the flasher, and I can't find. I knew where everything was. It was very unorganized. But now that he's went through everything, so don't let anybody do that. I've had Downrigger will take my sonar, my fish finder, and he'll totally reprogram it. I don't even know where the heck's going on. In fact, I'll tell you a little story about that. Was Sauger Steve, who was Walleye's kid. He was in there when I had. I don't know how many years, quite a few years ago. He ended up switching that deal, not on purpose, but he went to, is it kilometers?
Yeah.
And so I'm going down the lake, And the kilometer is not as fast as the miles per hour, I don't believe. And in this boat, it was supposed to go 45 miles an hour, and I would only get like 38 kilometers or whatever the heck they have. And I thought there was something wrong with it. I spent, I don't know how many hours trying to figure that out, and then I figured out finally that he actually took because you can go to these fish finders and put you want English or you want all
Right.
set it in those things. So be careful when you're goofing around with somebody's boat. Now let's talk a little bit about.
Well, I wanted to first talk. You brought up the boxes, and that's one of the things I wanted you to describe. What gave you the idea to use these? Because they're not actually tackle boxes.
No.
But talk a bit about why you chose that, because he has separate of these plastic tubs, not real big, but big enough, and you organize your tackle that way. Talk about that, and where'd you get that idea?
Well, you go to a box store, and the way I got that idea, I believe, was probably somebody I was fishing with, like Bill Sriracha, the salmon slayer. I kind of noticed how he does stuff. Now, when I first started fishing with Bill, he actually had milk crates that he would put his flashers in, and he had 2 or 3 or 4. I mean, he has so much tackle. This guy has so much salmon gear; it's unbelievable.
Well, I'll be talking with him on the podcast here too.
Yeah, he's
going to
find
out more about it. Yeah,
he'll have some great ideas for you. But so I picked those up because I, instead of having everything strewn out all over the boat, which I eventually do, by the way. I mean, I put them on the side. If I've used
but
one,
when you're fishing though, that's understandable. But the way that you have it organized so that when we start at the start of the day, everything's right there and it's all separated out. So you got that idea kind of from Bill and then put your own twist to it.
Well, originally when we started fishing salmon, if you remember, we had like a red outlined flasher, 11. All of them are 11-inch, 11-inch blue outlined, green outlined, and they'd have the reflective tape on both sides. Now they have so many different. If you go into the Lake Ridge Lodging and Bait Shop, go into Hortbeck Marina, they have walls of these different. And every day, if you talk to Eddie or you talk to Scott, they're biting on a different flasher. So then they have 11-inch flashers, of course, and 8-inch flashers. And the guy who introduced me to the 8-inch flasher was a slayer, and so you have to have both if you're going to be out there. And so I thought, okay, I can't put all these flashers in the same box or 2 or 3 boxes. I got to figure out how to separate them out. So if I'm calling for an 11-inch flasher, I put them in an 11-inch tub. And you really can't see in that tub because I lay them horizontal. You can't really see them, even though it's a clear tub, you can't see what you're looking for. So you got to actually go there and kind of look through them and see what's going on if you're looking for a specific one. And then I have an 8-inch tub. And, of course, that doesn't take as much of a tub, but it's both the same size. And then I have a smaller tub for my flies, and they're very unorganized, but I have flies that I started to use these little bags.
Ziploc bags.
Ziploc bags so they wouldn't get tangled up, and kind of put those in there. And then the Brad's cut bait, what I try to use for those is I keep the holders that they came in, and I try to put them back in there, and that kind of works, but not real well. I got to find a different method for that, and I'm interested to see what Don Wilkins, who's going to be one on this podcast, as well as Bill uses those. Now, what Bill will do with those is, and he'll tell you anyway, but he wraps those around like a styrofoam, black styrofoam,
like a pool noodle kind of thing.
Yeah. And he wraps those around. I'm talking about the flies and the cut baits. So he can see them visibly, and then he just takes them off. That's a pretty good method, doing it that way. But as far as the salmon goes, yeah, that's kind of the way I do that. But here's the problem. The problem is that Fort Peck has walleye, northern pike, smallmouth bass, lake trout. They also have catfish. Now, over the years, And I'm in the process of getting everything kind of organized now. And then, oh, by the way, then we fish below the dam, which is the river.
Right.
And that takes a different set of tackle.
Well, and you only touched on a few of the fish in Fort Peck, but the main sport fish is what you're talking about. Yeah.
So what I end up doing is what I'm going to do now is I got all these trays that I've gotten over all the years. And I think just like every angler has done, they buy 2 or 3 of this because that's what's recommended to bite on this species and this particular lake at this time. Well, you only have like 2 or 3 of these things. So what do you do with them? Well, I just throw them in a tray. So now you got all this hodgepodge stuff in your tray. I'm going to try to separate things out a little bit more specifically so I can go, let's say a guy says, hey, Captain, let's go fish the river below the dam. So I got this tray and I got that tray because you got plastics now too. You have jig tray, you got plastics, and you're using those plastics, and some have different days you use different plastics. So you got to have probably at least 2 trays, and then I'm going to look for some sort of a carrying case that if I don't use my boat, because that's the other problem for guys that have boats, that they get everything in their boat, it's tough for them to not use their boat.
Pick up and move to somebody else's boat or whatever, yeah.
So I went through the west side of the shop that we have over there at Fort Peck at the headquarters, and totally I threw out some stuff that I knew I was never going to use and that I didn't use, and just trying to get some room in these trays so I didn't have to buy a bunch of trays. And I found some in my Lewistown place that I live in, and I got those. So I'm going to bring them over, and I'm going to have, like a kokanee tray for Holter when we go fish over there, maybe 2 or 3 trays of stuff, because we used to fish Hauser and Holter for kokanee quite a bit. And I have some trays that I put some of those lures in there, like Hildebrands, which I don't even know if they make them anymore, along with different spoons and things like that the trout in the kokanee would go after. And so that's the key in my mind, is to know what you have and know where it's at when you need it. And if you do that, it's going to be easier if somebody says, hey, let's go to Fort Peck. Let's go out in Fort Peck right now and let's go fish for northern pike. I'll have enough tackle I can cobble together for what I bought over the years that I can actually, show them what I'm thinking about using, depending upon if you're going to troll for them or if you're going to cast for them. That's the one thing. Before I met Brian Olson, I didn't do any jigging at all. So Brian loves the jig and he's very effective doing it. And that's what I ended up doing. I look at him and see what he's doing. So now all of a sudden I got to buy a bunch of jigs. And I used to have a tray full of jigs that I'd have in my big square tackle box that I never even pulled out hardly most of the time. When I used to fish with Walleye Wayne, and and back in those days it was a black jig, or it was just a lead colored jig, maybe a white jig. Didn't have all these different fancy colors now, and they didn't have these longer shafts like they have now. I remember fishing with Marvin Loomis, and Marvin had these football jigs that he claimed, and he knew how to fish them pretty good. It's easier to get them unsnagged. So it actually looks like a football, and the way they were designed, and that's what Marvin would do. Because there's certain times of the year you're going to jig for walleye, for example, and then you and I think I actually enjoy pulling bottom bouncers more than anything, and that's a different time of the year. I like to sit there and just watch the rod instead of working it all the time, and so that's a whole another ball of wax or ball of. It be a line tangler, if you want to call it that. But there's different things that you can buy at your local sporting goods store that you can keep that tackle when you're talking about leaders for walleye or pike or whatever you're going to do with those, as well as your bottom bouncers. I mean, so I have a tray that I have for bottom bouncers that I put underneath the console on the passenger side of my boat, that has 2 ounce, 1.5 ounce. I do have some 1 ounce. I don't have really a lot of lighter bottom bouncers. So I just put it in there, but I have them in the package and they're clearly marked. So if you're fishing with me, or if we have 2 or 3 guys fishing with me and you get snagged and you lose it, then just go into that tray, put that on, and it's a little bit easier for you to get going.
Well, the bottom line is with the captain, the thing that's always impressed me is this whole tray idea. And in fact, Captain is going to share with us some pictures of that. And so I'll be posting that on MontanaOutdoor.com with this article about this podcast so you can see his tray method and that. Now, before I let you go, Captain, one last thing is, and it's kind of along the organizational thing, and that is, as far as, we all organize things differently. And later on in the podcast, I'm going to ask all of you out there listening to send me some of your ideas too, so we kind of have an exchange of ideas. But the other side of organizing when you're fishing and all that is organizing how it gets presented. And so there's all these different rod holders and all that out. You use the Cisco track system on your Warrior. Right. Talk about that, and why did you choose that?
Well, I think Ray Cole was using that, and that was years ago that I saw that. And so that's really a neat system because, with a regular rod holder, you figure, okay, when you buy a boat, the guy goes, like Matt from Mondak Marine goes, okay, where do you want this rod holder here and that? With that track system, and Cisco is not the only ones that make it, but with that track system, you can move your rod holder wherever you want. And you can put your downriggers on there, and you can move them wherever you want. I fish with 4 downriggers, and I have 2 on each side. And then if we get 2 people in the boat, then we fish with, what do you call those? They're not downriggers. I got a mind for it here. What the heck do they call those? They call them dipsy divers.
Yeah.
And, and sometimes that's the only thing that works. So, as far as catching, that's for salmon, by the way. Lake trout, I don't do a lot of lake trout fishing, but I think what I would do with lake trout is, I got those jigs, a bigger jig, and I usually ask Scott or Eddie over there at Fort Peck what are they biting on, and they're pretty upfront was telling me that. Of course, they sell the tackle. Don Wilkins is also pretty good at saying, here's what I'm using. We also use jigging wraps as well as those, can't think of what the heck they call them now. They're like a jigging wrap, but they're made out of Michigan. What are they? We used to sell them at the shows all the time.
Are you talking about the Rapalas and the...
No, I'm talking about the... they're colored, they're glow in the dark, and
I know what you... Yeah, I can't think of it either, but we'll come up with it. But on this track system, the thing that I want to talk about there is, and I'll put a link to Cisco, and you can look at that and see. So if you ever think about reconfiguring your boat, but it's a neat way to stay organized and be able to slide stuff up and down. You can actually put everything from, you have like a cleaning tray that you can put on there and all kinds of things. So to me, that kind of tops it off for your whole organizational deal, is that track system really gives you a lot of versatility. So.
Tom Caboza, is that Tom's last name?
Yeah.
He's got that manufacturing company in Billings. He sells those tracks too.
Yeah.
And
yeah, he's got some really cool stuff to keep you organized too. So anyway, those are some neat things to do. Is there anything else that you have done in your boat that you think is unique as far as keeping things organized?
If I have, it's not unique to my mind. It's more, I learned it from somebody. I saw it so that's what I would do is that when you fish with somebody, I fished with guys in their boat, and I tell you what, they're the cleanest boat. You don't even know they have any tackle in there. They use a lot of the compartments there to hide their rods and reels and stuff like that. And I tend to sometimes, if I'm fishing with 2 other guys, there's a lot of tackle and there's a lot of rods and reels, so you got to kind of be aware of that. But Most of the time, I think I just, I look at other people and I say, that's a great idea. I think I'll incorporate that. But there's not any one set deal. I know that I have with this Cisco, I have a tool holder, where it has the pliers, it's got the needle nose, it's got the, anything you're going to need, the clippers to.
Yeah, and I love that because it stays central in the boat. Yep. And you got everything on the little stretchable line, so you can just grab it and clip and go, and you're not looking around for it. So, yeah, that's unique. But the tray system that Captain has, you'll see some pictures of it. I love it because it's stackable. So again, it stays everybody's way. When you're getting ready to land a fish, the worst thing can happen, it happens a lot in boats, is now everybody's tripping over everything. And you've got these, bulky tackle boxes that you bring everything with you instead of like what the Captain does. If we're going out for a certain species, it's all in these stackable trays. So you don't have so much junk laying around. So anyway, neat idea.
Also, with the live scope, there's a cord that you got to figure out where you're going to put it so you're not tripping over that. I have a live scope in the back of the boat, and I have a live scope in the front of the boat. Now, what I'm going to do this year is I had a Garmin. I still do have that Garmin, but I had a 34 transducer. I upgraded to a 62 because the 34 was not letting me get down further enough. So I worked with Tom out of Billings, and we designed a deal where I can have that in the back of the boat, so it's not in the way of anything, so I can see my downriggers, I can, hoping I can, and I can see the offerings that I'm having. You can see the fish swim up, and I'm looking forward to doing that during the salmon season. If it does anything, it passes the time of day that you say, oh, there's you talk about those Cisco, there's a bait ball right there. Oh, here comes salmon. Here comes one. Or here, maybe it's a lake trout or whatever. So that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, and then it swims over to my line and grabs it. And
exactly.
Then I catch it, and then I make fun of you that you didn't catch it.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we'll have that in the podcast description. We'll get you a link to that, and you check it out. Captain, thanks for sharing your ideas with me.
Yeah, I hope it helps people out. And if you're around Fort Peck and you see me, you can ask me or even come by the headquarters, because I am going to make an assertive effort this year to be a lot more organized. And I'm not one of the most organized guys when it comes to tackle. I got downrigger fooled, obviously, but there's some other guys that I hang around Fort Peck with. They know how to be organized, and we all learn from each other. That's the bottom line.
And you'll thank yourself when you stay that way, too. So have you ever thought of doing a DIY project for your home? I've known John, Corey, and the rest of the gang at Superior Hardwoods in Missoula, Montana for a very long time. They've always been there for me, and I know they'll be there for you, too. A true partner to help complete your DIY home improvements. Heck, they have been doing that since 1977. Whether you're dreaming of a charming accent wall or a complete floor makeover, they have it covered. There is no better feeling than the satisfaction of adding a touch of history to your home with their unique reclaimed woods. Now, I'm not just talking about lumber here. I'm talking about a story waiting to be told. My friends at Superior Hardwoods of Montana proudly stock over 11 acres of stunning reclaimed wood. Perfect for turning your house into a home that is as unique as, well, you are. And don't worry, if you're just starting out with your first DIY project, the pre-finished flooring, pre-finished paneling, and trim options at Superior Hardwoods make it easier than ever to tackle any project like you've been doing it for years. So what do you say, gang? Why not dive into your next DIY adventure with confidence and let the decades of experience that they have at Superior Hardwoods take you through every step? Need a little inspiration? Well, visit them online at superior-hardwoods.com. Now, that's a great place to start out by browsing their website, again, at superior-hardwoods.com. That's superior-hardwoods.com. Not only will they help guide you through your home makeover with all their amazing ideas and their over 100,000 square feet of the most incredible wood flooring, paneling, and other wood products, they'll actually guide you through the woods. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. First time I went to their showroom just south of Missoula on Highway 93 South, I was blown away by the unbelievable selection of different types of wood from not just Montana, but from all over the world. Best of all, I sat down with them, told them a bit about what I was thinking of doing, and the next thing I knew, I was hearing incredible ideas and learning about the perfect wood for what I wanted to do. That is what I mean by letting them guide you through the woods at Superior Hardwoods of Montana. Go see him. You know, another guy that I admire a great deal for his skills. You've heard him on this podcast many times. Also, just a great teacher when it comes to helping you learn some new techniques and that. So I thought, I'll bet you he has some good tips on getting your tackle organized and that. Probably a guy that's pretty busy right now, Don Wilkins, who's a great guide over there on Fort Peck. And a great fisherman and good friend. Don, welcome back to the Montana Outdoor Podcast, and thanks for jumping on here with us and just giving us a little idea of how you get organized to get out there and tackle a big lake like Fort Peck.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, one of the things that, especially when you're fishing a big lake like Fort Peck where it's multi-species, but really anywhere in Montana, we're really spoiled in that you don't have to go very far and you're finding all kinds of different species. And what I see sometimes in boats and that is, everybody will try to either take everything and try to have it in the boat, or if they don't, they've got a few things kind of stuffed here and there in the boat, and then they say, oh, wait a minute, tomorrow we're going to go after, we've been fishing walleye, but we're going to go after king salmon now. And trying to find all that stuff and make that transition can be a mess. So as a guide, obviously, I assume you got to move pretty quick. What are some of your main organization tactics you use to, one, I guess, take us through how you get your boat ready to go in the morning and what makes you decide what goes where?
Well, yeah, it just kind of depends on, what we're targeting in the morning. If we're after, walleye and a smallmouth trip, then I make sure that, I've got the jigs and everything ready for pitching. I have the bottom bouncer rods kind of at the top of the rod locker, and everything's just kind of ready to go. And those bags and boxes to replace any of that stuff is, pretty close at hand. And I always have, a few bags with some crankbaits in them, and those are sorted not necessarily by brand or color, but I keep everything separated by depth that they'll run and things like that.
Oh, good idea. Yeah. By depth.
And there's some rod holders that they have out now that'll slide in to some seat pedestals. Superior Angling makes some really nice ones. So, and that's the other thing too, is I like to have the rods out and ready to go. So I just have them in the holder. So when we drive to where we're fishing, I'm not fumbling around in the rod locker. The rods are already out and we just bait up and start fishing. And, talking about being efficient and things like that, that saves you a lot of time when you're not shuffling people around to get them out of the way and dig rods and gear out. So
right. When you say rod holders that go into seat pedestals, what do you mean by that?
So it's like a 10 position rod holder. It's not like a rod holder for trolling. It's a vertical rod holder where you can put
gotcha.
All of your rods. Yeah, and you can put a couple pitching rods and bottom bouncer rods. And, if you got people pitching and there's a couple people going to pull bottom bouncers, you can get the pitching rods in the hands of the people right away, and they can start fishing while you're getting your bottom bouncers set up. So you just kind of get going a little quicker.
Yeah, and with you as a guide, you can have a few people in the boat at the same time. And I've noticed in some boats this happens a lot where, you get into one of those days where it seems like you're having to change up quite a bit, just trying to figure out, what the walleye wants or whatever you're fishing for, and you're trying to figure it out, and stuff starts getting laid around. Right. Now, all of a sudden, you get a fish on, you bring it in, and it's a mess. You're trying to step over everything to be able to land that. How do you keep that from happening so that, things are accessible, but they're just not out everywhere? So in the process of fishing, how do you keep it organized?
Well, Live Fishing, LIV, makes some really nice clear plastic tackle bags now. They're really heavy plastic, two-sided that you can see through on both sides. And especially, it seems like plastics and jig heads are the things that get thrown around a lot. Crankbaits, I always try to be really careful and put that stuff away because, people put their arm on one or step on one, and then that's not good.
Yeah.
But those tackle bags, you can just toss your package of plastics back in there. They don't take up much room. They have a big, heavy zipper on them, and you just toss them right back underneath the dash. And that's probably the biggest thing. And the other thing is when you are changing out, anytime you get a second, just gather some stuff up and put it away. Cause man, you know how it is. By the end of the day, you can have looks like a damn yard sale going on in the back of your boat. So
yeah, exactly. And I know, like salmon fishing, I fish with the captain all the time, and I mean we've done it before where everybody gets a little lazy and you kind of leave a few things out. Then all of a sudden you get a double hookup, and everyone's trying to get to the rod in the downrigger and all that, and you've got boxes of flashers and everything, and it can just really be a mess. So what he went to was these clear tubs where everything just goes back in the tubs and they stack on each other real easy.
Yeah.
And that seems to have worked really well. So when you've got a very active kind of, I guess what's the best way of putting it? It's a hurry up and wait, you're for kings where you can have a long period of time where it's pretty quiet. Then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. So, what would you say is that what was it, the lives or what is the thing that you're saying that you put everything back in just to keep it out of the way?
It's made by Live Fishing is the company. It's
okay.
it's just LIV. And that's mainly what I use, my plastics. And then, the walleye jig heads, you can just throw them right back in there. And like I said, they're clear on both sides. So when you pull them out from underneath there, and I sort everything by length, the plastics, some are 2 3s, 3/8, and 3 3s, and then everything just goes back in the same bag. And talk about being like organized and being able to find everything, you put it back in the bag where it goes. And then when you're looking for a specific size, everything's in the same bag. So things are really nice. And they also make some really nice rod sleeves that are nice for putting in your rod locker. So when you're pulling rods out, everything's not all tangled up.
Yeah. And that's a huge one too, where you decide you're going to change out and you want to start throwing some jigs or whatever, and you try digging that out and it becomes a nightmare. So rod sleeves, good idea.
Yeah.
So how about when we're going out to our next spot, we especially in places like Peck where you're going to have a little rougher water and all that stuff, any like quick tie down things that you use to at least kind of keep the gear readily, so you're not having to put it, down underneath and all that, because sometimes we're running from one point to the next and that can be a little rough getting from one to the next. Anything you use to kind of keep everything secure but still available and lines not blowing in the wind, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's where those rod holders that I was talking about earlier really come in handy, because when everybody is spooling up and we're hooking the rods up, those rods go right in that holder. I can put 10 of them in there. They have rubber cups on the top of it to keep the reel from bouncing around and getting damaged. And those rods, once you get them in there, they're not coming out. So once you run from one spot to the next, you get to the next spot, you just pull the rods right back out of that thing again and get back to fishing. And then the rods aren't laying on the floor of the boat, bouncing around, getting the eyes beat up and everything like that. So those things are really, really nice, and they're really handy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard of something. I haven't got one yet, but I've heard of an idea. The captain's always got his way of saying, okay, wrap the line around and we'll stick the hook into the cork and the rod, or we'll, some people like to put it in one of the eyes of that. And I saw this deal where you put it fastens onto your rod, and it's a pretty strong magnet, so that anything you have on the end of the rod, it just holds right to that. So it's real simple to hold that whatever you're using, jig or whatever, and line in place. Have you seen anything like that or tried any of those?
I haven't. I usually use just the hook holder on the rod. But I haven't seen any of that. But something like that might be handy, especially for when you're pulling bottom bouncers or something. Because sometimes
that's what I was thinking for bottom bouncers.
Yeah, the leader length is longer than where that hook holder is. So something like that definitely could be kind of handy for sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna put a link in the podcast to that. Lastly, end of the day, getting things kind of okay. Time to get. Day's over. Everybody's jumping out of the boat, telling their stories, doing all this stuff. You're loaded up in the trailer and back into the shop. What's your routine for getting the day done and being ready for tomorrow, so that you can just get up and go?
Yeah. Usually I'll go through and I'll just do a quick inventory on, how many jigs I have, left in the jig box. And what was working best, the prior day, and make sure I have plenty of extras of those, clean the garbage out, make sure I have plenty of plastics, and just kind of restock everything, and that's where being able to keep everything in separate bags and things like that will save you a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
As you can look and see pretty quick what you have and what you went through, and retying leaders and things like that, and just make sure in the morning that all you have to do is maybe grab some minnows and head out on the water,
Mm-hmm. And what kind of maintenance do you do as far as looking at that? Some people, they're checking their leaders and checking their knots and everything after every time they catch a fish. Other people saying, that's a little too much. Except for, when you're fishing for kings, I like to look at it every single time. But is there any certain kind of maintenance that you do daily, weekly, or whatever on reels or anything like that you would recommend?
Probably not weekly on my reels, but every couple of weeks I'll take the handles out of my spinning reels and pull that spool off the top. And it's just a couple drops of reel oil in there. You don't need much. And you don't want to put too much on there. Otherwise, it'll start making a mess as far as reel maintenance goes. And then leaders, just inspect them with all, there's a lot of pike, there's a lot of sticks and a lot of rocks in the back, and you just get a few little nicks on there, and I'll just cut it off and just tie a new one on. It doesn't take that long, and I'd rather do that than get a big fish up by the boat and then have the line break or something right there and ruin somebody's day.
Right. There's nothing worse than that. Lastly, what is your biggest pet peeve that you have that you say, gosh, I wish people wouldn't do that in my boat?
Oh, man.
Is it a long list or a short one?
No, there's really not a lot. I think maybe the biggest, I guess the biggest thing is probably reeling a jig or something in at the end, and we're getting ready to move, and they reel that jig right into the end of the tip of the rod.
Oh, God, yeah.
What you do is you can bust that ceramic out of the end of it. And I guess if I had to say anything, it would be that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably it. And that's really the only thing that I honestly see that much. And it's just when it's just inexperience. It's not they're doing it on purpose, but.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and I know one other thing I forgot I was going to ask you is, since you deal with a lot of different people being a guide, is there any one thing that you see that people tend to forget the most?
Probably when they're coming to Fort Peck, one of the things they forget is, bring clothing and bring attire that so you're prepared for anything, especially this time of year. We were out just the other day and it was 33 degrees and the wind was howling and you felt like you needed ice fishing gear. And by 2 p.m, everybody had shorts and t-shirts on. So that's the biggest thing, is just being prepared for just about any kind of weather here.
Great suggestions, Don. I thank you very much for spending some time and letting us know about your organization techniques and that. As far as you and guiding, any openings that you got coming up? And if so, how do we get a hold of you?
It's pretty full until, further on into September. But, if you're looking to get out on the water with me, you can go through, Trevor's Guide Service, Big Sky Charters, Get the Net Outfitters. You can call up to the Lake Ridge and we'll get you out.
I'll have a link to those as well in the podcast description, everyone. If you get a chance and you want to learn Fort Peck, and I mean really learn Fort Peck, this is one of the great guides to do. Don Wilkins, thank you so much for your advice, and we'll see you out on Peck here soon.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks. I appreciate it. You have a good afternoon.
Here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast, we talk about doing fun stuff out here in Montana's great outdoors. Now, we don't bring up work, and we for sure don't talk about taxes. Well, that is until now. But hey, don't worry. I'm going to talk about those things in a good way. What do I mean by that? Well, my friends at Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer can help you put your tax refund into the perfect equipment that will get the job done way faster so you can get back out of here with us and do all the fun stuff in Montana's great outdoors. Now, how can that be? Well, just talk to the gang at Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer, and they'll show you their incredible line of new baseline equipment trailers and dump trailers. I'm here to tell you, those are things that will for sure help you get the job done faster than you likely have ever thought possible. Now, let me give you an example. Baseline dump trailers have the absolute best combination of quality and functionality that will flat make those trailers the backbone of all your projects. See, the Baseline dump trailers at Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer feature a multifunctional gate with a holdback system and board brackets to give you extra hauling capacity and stability. And like I said, it's a dump trailer, so whether you're clearing debris, hauling gravel, or managing construction tasks, when you get to where you're going, you just turn it on, dump the load, and before you know it, you're heading to your favorite lake, river, or stream. And that's just one example of how my friends at Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer can help you increase your productivity and make your workday go a whole lot smoother and faster. So go see your Baseline dealer. It's Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. They have inventory in stock right now for purchase. So go see them today. That's Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, Montana at 5680 Expressway. Or just give them a call, 406-549-4243. Or you can go see their whole inventory online at rmtte.com. That's rmtte.com. Do it today because, hey, we miss you out here. It's time to come fishing. Now we're going to switch to another guy that I've had the honor and fun of fishing with many a time out there on the big water of Fort Peck, going after those king salmon, which has become one of the most popular things and continues to grow. And folks, if you've never tried it, you really should. Now, if it's something you've never done, I will highly recommend you get a guide, because if you don't, you're going to invest in a pile of tackle and stuff that, if it's not your cup of tea, you're going to have some pretty good money put into it. So, plus, there's a lot to learn about it and technique about it, and taking a guide out will give you a lot of great, good, solid information and get you going in the right direction. And speaking of having a lot of tackle, here's a guy that I know, Bill Zarodka, has a lot of tackle. And Bill, you seem to be one of those fishermen that really likes to key on some of the bigger fish that Fort Peck offers, the big lake trout and the big kings swimming around there. And are you shocked just looking back? You've been doing this a long time, just how much tackle you've accumulated over the years?
Oh, definitely. It's amazing how, a person, I think I probably started fishing Fort Peck in the early 80s, maybe 82 or 83. And, it starts out simple and you have a small boat, and the boats over the years got bigger. And so did the needs for tackle. And I think I still have lures from back in the day. You never really get rid of them if you don't lose them. So you got lots of stuff. And it evolves.
Yeah, it seems like the bigger the boat we get, instead of enjoying that extra room, we find a way to fill it with more stuff, which can be great in that. But one thing I've noticed fishing with you is the accessibility of your tackle. And you do some really interesting things. And I'm going to have you describe it. Hopefully you can send me a picture or two. And I may have a few pictures myself just being on your boat. But the way that you place a lot of your lures and stuff right up above you in the back of your boat, is that a pool noodle that you're sticking your lures into? What is that up there?
Yeah, exactly. I've got some of those pool noodles kind of pegged with a wire and screwed up on top that are, and I got them inside the boat now too, all over in the bathroom, along the whole kitchen area. They're great for hanging spoons and a few different crankbaits. It's not a big flasher thing, but it sure keeps a lot of spoons, looking at you available.
Yeah, and that's what I like about it, because you never know when you want to make that change. And especially, when you feel like you're into those fish, you don't want to spend, a half hour trying to find that one lure that you really know would work well in this condition. And in your case, you have that just readily available. Where did you get that idea, or is that something you thought up?
It's hard to say. A lot of ideas a guy gets, he's probably seen happen somewhere else. I don't remember exactly where I came up with that one, but it sure works good. About every 3-4 years, you put up new noodles because the sun kind of deteriorates them and they fizz off. And it's believe it or not, that's an ongoing process. The whole boat storage. I got a big boat, a 30-foot boat, so there's lots of room in there, whether you can find it all. So I try to, we'll take salmon, lake trout, and I actually have a fair amount of walleye gear in there too. Like I may anchor up in the evenings or nights and we'll drop some equipment out for walleye. But primarily, I would say I'm more of an open water troller throughout the season, going for, opportunists, whatever, ideally salmon, but there's plenty of lake trout, that take that stuff too. So yeah, I like to have, and I've got some, shelving on the side. And the key is really to have it organized. Most of my flasher fly setups, I'll have a little, a piece of that noodle cut that you slip over the flasher, wrap your fly on it. So it does keep that where it isn't a big jumbo mess. You stack a few of the main ones I want that are readily available. And then I always have deeper. I mean, there are so many different lures and different things that maybe worked 10 years ago. A certain fly or a certain little hoochie or something worked great. You buy a lot of them. And since then, they haven't worked so great. But, the primary stuff I have at my fingertips. And if I have to go deeper, I have storage bins that aren't readily available looking at you, but they're in there if I need them.
So on that flasher thing you were describing, so you've got that pool noodle. Of course, it has a slit in the middle. You mean you're sliding that right on the side of the big flasher, and then wrapping the lure and all that right around it? Then.
Yep. I would say it's more like a pipe insulation. A foam pipe insulation, like say what a water heater comes. They usually come with little pieces of that.
Sure. Yeah. I see what you're saying.
A 3/4 inch hole in the middle where you just cut that into a 2-inch wide strip. slide that over the edge of your flasher and wrap your fly on it and hook it back into that foam. And that, I mean, it's not the perfect deal, but it
Well,
does.
that's a good idea, though.
Yep.
Because then when you're so then when you're putting those away into a tub or whatever, not everything's starting to connect and wrap around. So you go to pull one flasher out and you've got 10 of them.
Yep. And I actually just resurrected. I just set them up on the boat. I'll get a picture here.
Yeah,
Shortly,
that'd be
and
great.
I'll send it to you of a few things. But it was these, I believe I got them at Cabela's, but they were a flasher holder, kind of like a big, a wrap you unroll. I believe it held at least 10, if not 12 flashers. That could be your bigger 11-inch or smaller ones. And it's kind of it's Velcro. You can close the compartments. They're a screen on the back, to keep them from molding and keep them airy. And now I've set those up and they hang, and that's a nice program. Then the bottom, I'll have my Dipsy set up, wrapped up, ready to go. And you can have your 10-inch flashers, your 8-inch flashers, and flies or whatever you want ready to go, kind of looking at you there. So that's going to be a nice storage feature too, where everything's just a little more organized, and they're not all even on rough waves or whatever running across the lake banging together, and ultimately that stuff tangles up even if you do have that.
Wow, that sounds like a great one there. If you could send me you could send me a picture of that, I'd love to. I'll put that up so people will be able to take a look at that. So that gets the big stuff, the big flashers and all that. But one of the things that, of course, anyone that loves to fish for those big kings is you got to have a pretty wide variety. Everything from flies to the squids, to then the cut baits and so on. Now, how do you organize all those so they're readily available, but not, where it's a hodgepodge? Do you organize them by color, by size, or what's your way of doing it?
Yeah, I'll have, the different tubs that maybe have your, we'll say the 4-inch cut baits or the bigger cut baits in there, and multiple colors. And I'll usually have a few out that maybe are wrapped up hanging on my foam to go. Mm-hmm. And then, kind of ultimately utilize what's available. And then you always have your compartments you can dig into if you want to go deeper, vary the colors. It's really hard to have everything really exposed right at your fingertips, but you have your good starting point, and if you have to dig deeper, it's all there to go for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I love about your boat is when you get on and somebody hooks up, or and it's happened before where maybe you have 2 or 3 hook up. You don't have everything and boxes and everything all over the floor. So now you're tripping around, and the guy with the net's trying to, step over everything and that. So, all that stuff is put kind of, like you say, either hanging or off in side deals to keep that whole floor area open at all times. Is that something that you perfected, over the years of just saying, okay, this is how I do it? And how do you pick where certain things should be, in the boat, and where other things shouldn't?
Well, luckily, like I said, with a bigger fishing platform, that helps immensely. You're gonna fish to the strength of your boats. And I have little boats too. I have little 14-foot Lunds that sit in the river, just a tiller open fishing boat. And you know what? There it's real simple. My tackle box is about what you can carry in your hand, a few jigs. So we'll keep that simple. This big one, I really like the open floor, and that boat's big enough to do it. I hung my cooler out over towards as far as I can in the back, but out over the edge, so that's not taking up floor space. It'd be harder to do on a little smaller boat because the weight of it leveraging off to the side is maybe going to cant you a little more. But I really will make sure and keep that entire floor space. And I'm always a forward trolling boat. I'm not doing a whole lot of standing on top of things, jigging or that. So all the reeling and the action is at the back of the boat. Mm-hmm. But I keep that floor space, nothing has to sit on the floor. It's all wide open, so it's easy to walk. And there's chairs that are movable. They're just basically lawn chairs that stack into one another, and you can move them around wherever you need be. And depending on how many people fishing, you might have 4 chairs out, or you might have them all stacked in a pile and just one chair available. But that really keeps that floor space clean, and being it's a hard roof with a cabin, the net lives on top of that, so it's up out of the way. The handle sticks over, so you have a nice open floor space to maneuver around on.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really goes along with organization, in my opinion, is that the maintenance of your rigs. And when I say maintenance, that's not just oiling reels now and then, but for example, checking your nuts, checking, your leader and seeing if anything's frayed. How often do you do that? And what's your process there? If I'm not mistaken, you take a look at everything every time you pull a salmon in, right?
Yeah, I sure like to feel that a little bit with my hand. You run it on there, and realistically, when a person's, that stuff's hooked in a downrigger release, so it's kind of pivoting and twisting there. I'll change we'll say I'm running a 30-pound leader off braid or something on the downrigger. You're gonna pinch your mono in the downrigger release, not on your braid. And I'll actually change all those leaders at least once a year, once a season, and sometimes twice. If it's a lot of action and a lot of catching, you know what? You're only running a 30, 40, 50-foot piece of mono on there. I just cut it off and splice a new one on it. It prevents a lot of headaches down the road. But every year, I don't necessarily change the braid deeper line every year, but I will definitely change that new mono leaders every year, and sometimes a couple times during the season if there's a lot of catching going on.
Mm-hmm. Now, and speaking of line, one of the things that I've seen over the years that can really be a problem is, let's say, you get a fish and it snaps it off, and so you've lost that. Now you need to retie. You're overfished. You want to get some things, obviously you can't catch fish if you don't have stuff in the water. Where do you store your leader so that you can get to it quick and retie and go?
Well, I have some not the long leaders, but we'll say little 6-8 foot, the snub, say between your dipsy diver and your flasher. I'll have 2, 3, 4 of those tied up, wrapped on a noodle, ready to go. And then for, say, we're going to redo a whole line, I need 40, 50 feet of fluorocarbon or mono. There's spools of it under, in one of my storage compartments available. Sure. When I just grab them and retie if I have to. And I normally have enough gear. I'll have, if we're down rigging and that's what it's on, there's 1 or 2 spare rods. Depending how many people fish with me on a given day. I mean, we might have, if there's enough people, maybe we have 8 lines out or 6 lines out. And if there's, if I'm by myself, I'm down to 2. So there's usually plenty of extra equipment. That's kind of easy. You just grab a new one. But there's stuff there readily available if I have to retie. Mm-hmm. Pretty much anything. All my salmon gear lives in my boat. Almost all my fishing gear, which is a nice thing of having a big boat with lots of storage, whether it's salmon, trout, walleye, trolling, jigging, you name it. And the downriggers are on year round. That's not just a seasonal thing. They're pretty much always on my boat.
Yeah, I love that idea of just having some leader already cut and ready to roll. Now, one thing that a lot of different fishermen have different ideas of what you should do when, let's say you're moving from one part of Fort Peck to the other, and this would apply even if, those of you listening are, fishing on other waterways, where you just need to put that rod away for a minute so you can run down the lake a ways and then be able to pull up and gear up and put back down. What do you recommend there as far as securing that line and all that? Some people say, well, no, I just hook it to the bottom eye. Other people say, no, I wrap it around the bottom and hook that into the cork. Everybody's got their different ideas. What do you do to make sure nothing comes loose when you're just moving from point A to point B?
Well, if I'm going to move with flashers on, they're going to be, if I'm going to leave them, I'll either take them off, which doesn't take too long, unhook them, or bring them down low by your reel. Wrap it once there so your flasher stays low, and then hook back to your rod eyes. What you don't want is your rod sitting in a holder up there high with a flasher just wildly spinning and banging around. The main thing on a run, you're moving 20, 30 miles an hour or a lot faster in some boats, and you don't want that spinning in the wind and wrapping up. So, in a lot of my stuff, they'll be a spoon is easy. You hook it down on your reel and set it in the rod holder, and that's not going anywhere. But the flashers, you tidy them up low to the reel where they can't spin on you, or just take them off.
Okay. All right. Now, do you do any of the, where you're rolling out with your downriggers, where you're stacking and any of that? How do you set up and have everything ready to go to do any stacking, or do you stack line on the same downrigger?
I don't do a lot of stacking. I will do a free slider sometimes. You have about a 6-foot piece of mono and a spoon, and you just hook it on once your downrigger's deployed, your flasher or another spoon on the bottom, you just hook this on your fishing line and throw it in the water, and it'll end up being about halfway down your line. Being I have enough downriggers on with 4 and also dipsies, the boards, there's plenty of deployment levels that I find that I don't do a lot of stacking or free sliders. It ends up being a little bit more of a mess when you do catch a fish. And it honestly doesn't help me that I've seen that much running them. I mean, if you're really having a slow day, sometimes it's fun to put more stuff out just to see, maybe get a bite. But when the fish are biting, that's kind of more of a nuisance trying to fight those extra lines on a rigger.
Yeah, Captain and I have tried to do stacking before, and we've had situations where we had to call in the ghost of Albert Einstein in to figure out how to untangle the whole damn thing.
Yep. Have a scissor handy because you get to cut all that loose and retie it all.
Redo it. Yeah, that could be a nightmare. Do you use planer boards at all, Bill? And how do you store those?
Well, mine, I have a big compartment, I guess it'd almost be like a live well up on the back deck there. That is kind of where I wash dishes, and my planer boards live in there. So they're readily available and out of sight. And I do a lot of board running anymore. I mean, once again, especially if there's multiple people on the boat where I would like to deploy some more lines, it's a great way of covering more water. And I was just up this last weekend, and the planer boards for last week, I guess, were very productive.
Awesome. Yeah. Now I heard that you've caught some salmon already this year.
Yeah, I fished. When it was here, I guess it was the week here. 2 beautiful days. Wind wasn't blowing, and we caught one salmon, about a 8-9 pounder. So that was fun, and we had a lot of lake trout cooperating. We were ideally trying to target salmon, but how they are. But we did manage to catch one, so that was a start anyway.
So when you're trying to fish for these salmon, and I know we're getting a little ways from the organizational side of things, but when you're trying to fish for salmon this early in, I guess, what we would call the salmon season, typically most people think about that as sometime July on. Are you going further down the lake away from the dam, or does it matter?
I don't think it matters too much. My gut feeling is, and we're all learning this, and I've spent many years doing it, and I sure don't have it figured out yet. But I think there's a sprinkling of them everywhere. We marked lots of bait. The one we caught was down a few miles, south of the main dam area. But I've caught them in the dry arm. I've caught them down the main lake, and I think they're just they're just kind of spread out right now. So it is just a lot of covered miles and open trolling, and naturally wherever you find them.
Yeah. Well, how deep were you when you caught these recent ones?
That last one was about 92 feet down with the gear, and it was pretty close down the bottom. Came on a spoon, and I like to run a lot of spoons for these early, like we're talking this April time frame. I mean, run the spoons, and I was running a deeper program, and I think if a person wanted to just change it up for them, go shallower for these salmon. And then you have to run stuff a little different, crankbaits and shallow running leads or coppers or something, because you're going to be up in that 20-25 foot of water.
Okay. Lastly, almost lastly, got a couple more questions. One, what would be your, say, biggest pet peeve, or that annoys you the most that people do when they're on your boat? I think every captain has one where you go, dang, I wish people wouldn't do that. What would that be?
Well, there's not. I mean, sometimes maybe if they're not familiar with it, try to be too helpful. Like, say we're going to run these downriggers and deploying Dipsy divers or stuff. I mean, I think you want to watch for a while and learn how it works. I mean, there's even an aspect of almost danger with that cable and those spools. And mine are digital, so they're auto contouring, and so it's always turning and moving. And I know everyone wants to be helpful, but sometimes the best thing is just stand back and watch. Yeah. That's probably the biggest thing that gets me, is like they immediately want to set all these and deploy them, and it's not quite that simple.
And lastly, what do you feel is, say, that maybe the number one or two or three things that most people forget when they get out fishing?
Oh boy. Well, usually on my boat, everything's on it, so I don't forget too many things. But I'm sure a net is a big one. If you forget that, that's kind of a bear cast. If you're landing them by hand, it can be done, and we've all did it. It's like
we've done it before. Yeah. That can be a one where you kind of come in and don't even talk about that one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So folks, don't forget your net. Any other bits of advice you want to share with us before we head out here?
Well, I know we'll say, people, we're talking gear and storage, and, if you're setting up your boat or in going to work it for the salmon and open water trolling, a lot of rods can be multiple purpose. I can take my Dipsy rods and use them with the heavy weight and a 3-way and, pull spinners, say you're walleye fishing, or you want a different tactic to try Lakers or salmon. So a lot of these rods can be multiple use. A jigging rod's a jigging rod. That's pretty hard to have a different rod fill in that position for walleye or Lakers. But a lot of these trolling rods can have multiple uses. So you don't have to have so much gear. And another thing now, we'll say we're running these big coppers and big steels and leads out there, different segments, which is a lot more rods and reels. Well, you can get 100 foot of lead or copper or steel or whatever, and run a heavy torpedo weight in front of it, instead of having a 200 foot, a 250, a 300, a 400, a 500 foot. Which is all its own sets of reels preloaded. So sometimes, there's many ways of getting things done with less gear, So just kind of food for thought. I mean, I have an awful lot of stuff in there, and I even look at ways of, do you really need all this crap in there? And you don't. Some of it is you just kind of learn through the years. So I think, that'd probably be good advice for people salmon fishing that aren't using a downrigger, is you can get it done with big torpedo trolling weights, clip them in front of your 100 or 200 foot, which, say a 200 foot goes down 40 feet, approximately 35 feet. Yeah, hook a big torpedo in there, and when you want to deploy it to 70, 80, 90 feet, and you can get by with the same setup.
Well, Bill, you always got great advice for us, and I appreciate you being so willing to share it with us, because that helps us all and helps everybody have a good time out there. Be sure and send me any of those pictures that you have time to send me, because I'll get those posted, and that should give people some ideas of how they can help stay organized and hopefully catch fish. You think we're going to have good salmon this year?
I hope so. I don't think we're going to see a overabundance of big fish this season. I think we're going to see a lot of this 3-year-old class, which will be the 8 to 12 pound type immatures. And I think the big fish, it's kind of to be determined. Hopefully there's a few around, but it's not going to be, I don't believe it'll be the season we had last year for catching lots of big fish. It'll be these 10, 12 pounders.
Yeah, I just did a podcast with Heath Headley, and he said the same thing. He said that he thinks you won't see as many as of the bigger ones this year, but they're out there. So
yep, and the positive note on the big ones is I know it was a less amount of stocking that we're kind of suffering that year class, but any one of them that did survive, normally when there's just a few fish, they get really big. So maybe we'll have some of the really big ones if there is a few out there.
Yeah, maybe nail another state record.
New state record. Wouldn't that be nice?
It would. All right, Bill, you have a great trip. I understand you're heading out east and going to go see if you can find some salmon up by in, where was it?
Lake Ontario. Ontario. We'll go test some techniques and lures out there.
Sounds great. All right, buddy. Thank you so much for being on the Montana Outdoor Podcast.
All right, Rager. Thanks.
There you have it, gang. I hope you found this podcast about getting your tackle and boat organized interesting and helpful. If you want to see some pictures of some of the organizational gear that the captain, Don Wilkins, and Bill the Salmon Slayer Zarodka talked about, just go take a look at the article about this podcast on MontanaOutdoor.com. The pictures will be right there. I'll also get a link to that article in the podcast description for this podcast. If it's not there right now, it should be there just real shortly. Speaking of that, I know I said I was going to put some different links of other things my guest may have mentioned, but I think in this case, it will be easier if you just go to the podcast description, which is on whichever site you listen to this podcast from, and scroll down and click the link that lets you email me. Then simply just let me know what questions you have for whatever gear that you're interested in, want more info on, and I'll round up a link or get an answer or an email from someone that can get you the info you're looking for. Like I said, head to the MontanaOutdoor.com website, MontanaOutdoor.com, and look for those pictures in that article about this podcast. You get a really good idea what they were talking about. Plus, I always like to hear from you to see what ideas you might have for future podcasts. So mention that as well. And remember, if you like listening to the podcast, be sure and share it on your social media and with your family and friends. Till we meet again next week, take care, be safe, and be good to each other. And thanks for listening to the Montana Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Montana Outdoor Podcast. It has been brought to you in part by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. And by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to RMTTE.com for more information. So what did you think of today's podcast? Send your questions and comments to Downrigger at MontanaOutdoor.com. We should be dropping a new podcast this next Saturday. Until then, we will see you soon out in Montana's great outdoors.